r/MaliciousCompliance church banned my daughter's dress, so I exposed their $500 secret. Mrs. Henderson, I'm going to need you to take Emma home and have a serious conversation about appropriate church attire. I stared at pastor's wife Linda Morrison, certain I'd misheard her. My 16-year-old daughter Emma stood frozen beside me in the church hallway, her face already flushing red with embarrassment. The other kids filing into youth group were starting to stare. I'm sorry, what? I managed to get out, my voice barely steady. Linda's perfectly manicured hand gestured dismissively at Emma's outfit, a knee-length floral sundress from Target that we picked out together just last week. That dress is far too form-fitting and distracting for the boys. We've talked about this before with the youth. Modesty is a virtue we take seriously here at Cornerstone Baptist. My mouth went dry. In my 10 years at this church, through my husband's cancer battle and death 3 years ago, through every potluck and prayer meeting and volunteer shift, I had never once been spoken to like this. Emma's dress was completely appropriate, more covered up than half the outfits I'd seen on other kids. Linda, this dress has sleeves, it's below the knee, and the fabric clings inappropriately. Her tone was ice cold now, and I noticed several other parents had stopped their conversations to watch our exchange. I won't have my youth group disrupted because parents can't be bothered to teach their daughters about modesty. Emma's breath hitched beside me, and I felt something snap inside my chest. Your youth group? And what exactly is inappropriate about? Mom, let's just go. Emma's voice was barely a whisper, but I caught the tremor in it. My confident, straight-A student daughter who'd been looking forward to tonight's movie night for weeks was now staring at the floor like she wanted to disappear into it. That's when I noticed Madison Morrison, Linda's own 17-year-old daughter, walking past us into the youth room wearing a crop top that showed her midriff and shorts that barely covered her thighs. She shot Emma a smirk as she passed. Are you kidding me right now? The words came out louder than I intended. Madison is literally wearing. Madison's outfit is perfectly fine, Linda cut me off, stepping closer with that patronizing smile I'd seen her use on countless other church members over the years. Perhaps if you spent less time questioning my judgment and more time actually reading your Bible, you'd understand the difference between modest and inappropriate. The hallway had gone completely silent now. 10 years of faithfully serving this church, 10 years of tithing even when money was impossibly tight as a widow, 10 years of believing this was our safe harbor, and here I was being dressed down like a rebellious teenager while my daughter's spirit crumbled beside me. We'll be going then, I said through gritted teeth, putting my arm around Emma's shoulders. See that you do. And Sarah? Linda called after us as we headed for the exit. I trust Emma will be dressed more appropriately next time. If there is a next time. The drive home was silent except for Emma's quiet sniffling. By the time we pulled into our driveway, my shock had crystallized into something much more dangerous, cold, calculated anger. If Linda Morrison wanted to play games about dress codes and modesty, I was more than happy to give her exactly what she'd asked for. Every single rule. What she didn't know was that I'd just gotten very, very motivated to pay closer attention to everything happening at Cornerstone Baptist. Starting with that designer handbag she'd been carrying tonight. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and a cup of coffee that had long gone cold, diving deep into research I should have done years ago. Emma had barely touched her breakfast before retreating to her room, mumbling something about not feeling well enough for school. The hurt in her eyes when she'd asked me, Mom, do I really dress inappropriately, had kept me up most of the night. I started with Cornerstone Baptist's financial transparency, or rather, the complete lack thereof. Most churches our size published annual reports showing where donations went. Ours hadn't done that once in the decade I'd been attending. Pastor James Morrison always gave vague updates about faithful stewardship and growing God's kingdom, but never actual numbers. Then I started thinking about Linda's wardrobe. That handbag she'd been clutching while humiliating my daughter? I'd seen it in a magazine Emma was reading, a Coach bag that retailed for over $400. Her shoes were Jimmy Choo's. The dress she'd worn to last Sunday's service still had the subtle shimmer that screamed high-end designer. I pulled up the church's public tax filings. Pastor Morrison's official salary was listed at $52,000 a year. Even adding Linda's part-time position as administrative assistant at $15,000, there was no way they could afford her wardrobe on that income. Not unless they had family money, which I knew they didn't. Linda loved to share her humble beginnings testimony whenever she wanted to relate to us regular folks. My phone buzzed with a text from my best friend Janet. Emma okay? Heard about last night. Madison Morrison is telling everyone your daughter was practically naked at church. I'm furious. I stared at the screen, my hands actually shaking. Linda hadn't just humiliated Emma, she was letting her daughter spread lies about it. My quiet, modest daughter was being painted as some kind of seductress because Linda Morrison had decided to make an example of her. I texted back, Emma's devastated. And I'm done playing nice. My phone rang immediately. Sarah, what are you planning? Janet's voice was worried. I know that tone. I'm planning to follow their dress code rules exactly. And maybe ask some questions about church finances while I'm at it. Be careful. The Morrisons have been running that church like their personal kingdom for 15 years. People who've crossed them before have found themselves unwelcome. After hanging up, I opened my closet and started pulling out the most conservative clothes I owned. If Linda wanted modesty, she'd get modesty that would make the Amish look progressive. Long sleeves, floor-length skirts, high necklines, the works. I was going to follow every single guideline in that dusty church handbook to the letter. But more importantly, I was going to start volunteering for everything I could get my hands on. Church finance committee meetings that I'd never paid attention to before. Building maintenance oversight. Fundraising events where I could observe exactly how money flowed through our congregation. Emma appeared in my doorway, still in her pajamas at noon. Mom, do we have to go back? Can't we just find a different church? I looked at my daughter, my brilliant, kind, faithful daughter who'd done nothing wrong except wear a sundress to youth group, and felt that cold anger settle deeper into my bones. No, sweetheart. We're not running away. We're going back, and we're going to make sure this never happens to another girl. What Linda Morrison didn't realize was that she'd just declared war on someone who had absolutely nothing left to lose. And I was very good at research. I spent Sunday morning getting ready like I was preparing for battle. The outfit I'd assembled would have made a Puritan proud: black ankle-length skirt, long-sleeved white blouse buttoned to my throat, hair pulled back in a severe bun, not a trace of makeup. Emma watched from my bedroom doorway, her expression shifting between confusion and concern. "Mom, you look like you're going to a funeral from 1850, she said quietly. She'd chosen to wear jeans and an oversized hoodie, her confidence in dresses completely shattered. "According to Mrs. Morrison's standards, this is appropriate church attire," I replied, checking my reflection one final time. If modesty is what she wants, modesty is what she'll get. The walk into Cornerstone Baptist felt different this time. Conversation stopped as we passed, heads turned, and I caught several people whispering behind their hands. Word had definitely spread about Thursday night's incident. I kept my chin up and guided Emma to our usual pew, 3 rows from the front. Pastor Morrison's sermon was about forgiveness and moving past grievances. The irony wasn't lost on me, especially when he kept glancing in our direction with barely concealed irritation. But it was Linda's reaction that really caught my attention. She spent the entire service shooting daggers at my outfit, clearly realizing I was making some kind of statement but unable to complain since I was following her precious modesty rules to the letter. After service, I made my move. Pastor Morrison, I approached him during the coffee and fellowship hour, speaking loudly enough for nearby congregants to hear. I've been thinking about getting more involved in church leadership. Specifically, I'd love to join the finance committee. As a single mother, I want to make sure our donations are being used wisely. His smile faltered for just a moment. Well, Sarah, that's wonderful. Though our finance meetings can be quite dry. Lots of boring spreadsheets and budget discussions. Oh, I don't mind boring, I said brightly. I'm actually quite good with numbers. I used to help my late husband with his business accounting. This was completely true. David had run a small construction company, and I'd managed all his books. The next meeting is Wednesday at 7, he said reluctantly. Linda can send you the details. Speaking of Linda, she materialized beside us like a perfectly dressed storm cloud. Sarah, how interesting to see you so covered up today. I'm glad our conversation had an impact. Your conversation certainly opened my eyes, I replied sweetly. I've been reading our church handbook cover to cover. Did you know there are actually written guidelines about modesty? Fascinating stuff. For instance, it says sleeveless tops and shorts above the knee should be avoided in the sanctuary. Linda's face went slightly pale. Last week, she'd worn a sleeveless sheath dress. Well, those guidelines are more suggestions, she stammered. Oh no, I don't think so. Page 47 specifically says all congregants should adhere to these standards during worship and fellowship. I pulled out my phone where I'd screenshotted the relevant pages. I'd hate for anyone to be confused about the rules. Maybe we should post these guidelines in the church bulletin so everyone knows exactly what's expected. Pastor Morrison cleared his throat uncomfortably. That might be unnecessary, Sarah. But Pastor, if these standards are important enough to send teenage girls home over, surely they're important enough to share with everyone? My voice stayed perfectly pleasant, but I watched his jaw tighten. I'm just trying to understand how we decide which rules apply to which people. The small crowd around us had grown very quiet. I could see Janet in my peripheral vision, fighting back a grin. Several other parents, including 2 mothers whose daughters had been dress-coded in the past, were listening intently. Linda recovered first, her practiced smile sliding back into place. Of course, you're absolutely right. We should be consistent. But her eyes promised retribution. Wonderful, I said. I'll type up those guidelines for next week's bulletin. Oh, and Linda? I love your dress today. Is that designer? It's gorgeous. The compliment hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Because what I didn't say, but what anyone paying attention would start wondering, was how a pastor's wife could afford what looked like a very expensive outfit. I was just getting started. The Wednesday Finance Committee meeting was held in the church basement, in a cramped room that smelled like old coffee and mildew. I arrived 10 minutes early, armed with a notebook and the kind of enthusiasm that clearly made Pastor Morrison uncomfortable. Sarah, so glad you could make it, he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. The other committee members, 3 older men I recognized but had never really spoken to, looked equally thrilled by my presence. I brought homemade cookies, I announced cheerfully, setting down a plate of chocolate chip cookies that were actually store-bought. I figured we might be here while going through all those financial details. The meeting started innocuously enough. Budget discussions for building maintenance, plans for the annual fundraiser, updates on the mission trip fund. But then we got to the discretionary spending reports, and things got interesting. What's this line item for pastoral care and representation? I asked, pointing to a monthly expense of $800 that had been consistent for the past year. That's almost $10,000 annually. Pastor Morrison shuffled his papers uncomfortably. That covers various ministerial needs. Clothing for official church functions, networking events, that sort of thing. Fascinating, I said, making notes. And this one, administrative supplies and materials, $600 a month? That seems high for office supplies. Harold Jennings, the committee chairman, frowned at his copy of the budget. Jim, I thought we talked about breaking down these discretionary categories more specifically. The board's been asking for more detailed reporting. Of course, Harold. We can definitely work on that transparency. Pastor Morrison's smile was strained. Sarah, any other questions? Just one more. I noticed we haven't published an annual financial report for congregants in, well, I couldn't find one for any year I've been attending. Most churches our size provide those for accountability purposes. The silence in that basement room was deafening. Harold cleared his throat. That's actually a very good point, Sarah. We used to do those. What happened to that practice? I asked innocently. Budget constraints, Pastor Morrison said quickly. The printing costs, staff time to prepare the reports. Oh, I could help with that, I offered brightly. I'd be happy to volunteer my time to compile a report. We could even do it digitally to save on printing costs. I watched Pastor Morrison's face cycle through several emotions before landing on forced enthusiasm. That's very generous, Sarah. Let me think about the logistics and get back to you. As the meeting wrapped up, Harold pulled me aside. Sarah, I'm glad you're asking these questions. To be honest, some of us have been wondering about the financial transparency ourselves. Jim's a good pastor, but the business side. He shook his head. Maybe fresh eyes would be helpful. Walking to my car, I felt a mixture of satisfaction and unease. I was definitely onto something, but Pastor Morrison's discomfort suggested I was also walking into dangerous territory. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. You need to stop causing trouble or you'll regret it. I stared at the screen, my hand suddenly shaky. But before I could process it fully, another message came in from Janet. Emergency. Madison Morrison just posted something horrible about Emma on Instagram. Can you come over? 20 minutes later, I was sitting in Janet's kitchen, staring at her phone screen in absolute fury. Madison had posted a photo of herself in a crop top with the caption, "At least I don't dress like a slut and get kicked out of youth group face with tears of joy #modesty #know your place." The post had dozens of likes and comments, including several from other church kids. She didn't tag Emma directly, but everyone knows who she's talking about, Janet said quietly. Sarah, this is character assassination. That girl is destroying Emma's reputation. I thought about the anonymous text, about Pastor Morrison's obvious discomfort during the meeting, about Linda's designer wardrobe and my daughter's broken confidence. They wanted to play dirty? Fine. It was time to take the gloves off. I drove home from Janet's house with Madison's cruel post burned into my memory and that anonymous thread echoing in my head. Emma was in her room when I got back, door closed, music playing softly. I knocked gently. Em? Can I come in? She was lying on her bed, staring at the ceiling. I saw it, Mom. Madison's post. Everyone's seen it. My heart shattered a little more. Honey, anyone with half a brain knows that girl is just being vindictive because... Because what? Because her mom humiliated me and now you're making waves? Emma sat up, and I could see she'd been crying again. Mom, maybe we should just switch churches. This is getting worse, not better. I sat on the edge of her bed, choosing my words carefully. What if I told you that the Morrisons might not be the perfect Christian family they pretend to be? What if there are things about them that the congregation deserves to know? Emma's eyes narrowed. What kind of things? Financial things. Your youth group fees, the mission trip money, the building fund donations. I'm starting to think some of that money isn't going where people think it is. You think they're stealing? I think they're living way above their means, and I want to know where the extra money is coming from. I pulled out my phone. Em, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Has Madison ever said anything about expensive gifts? Shopping trips? Anything about having more money than her dad's salary should allow? Emma was quiet for a long moment. Then, actually, yeah. She's always bragging about her designer stuff. Last month she showed off this new purse that cost more than most people's rent. And she's constantly getting these expensive makeup palettes and clothes. She paused. She said her parents believe in living abundantly because God wants his servants to prosper. Prosperity gospel. Of course. The perfect justification for embezzlement. There's something else, Emma continued hesitantly. Madison's always making comments about how her family basically runs the church. Like, she says they could get anyone kicked out if they wanted to. She acts like the rules don't apply to her because her parents are in charge. That explained the anonymous threat. And it confirmed my suspicion that this was bigger than just a dress code double standard. My phone rang, Harold Jennings from the finance committee. Sarah, I hope you don't mind me calling, but I've been thinking about our meeting tonight. I pulled some old records from my files at home, and there are some discrepancies I think you should see. Could we meet tomorrow? Absolutely. What kind of discrepancies? The kind that made me start keeping my own copies of financial documents 3 years ago. Jim doesn't know I have them. Harold's voice was grim. Sarah, if what I'm seeing is what I think it is, this goes back a long time. And it's not small amounts. After I hung up, Emma was staring at me with wide eyes. Mom, this is serious, isn't it? They're really stealing from the church? I don't know yet. But I'm going to find out. I stood up, resolve hardening in my chest. Things might get ugly before they get better. Are you okay with that? Because once I start pulling this thread, there's no going back. Emma's expression shifted, and for a moment I saw a flash of her father's determination in her eyes. They humiliated me in front of everyone. Madison is telling people I'm a slut. And they've been stealing money from people who trust them? She shook her head firmly. Pull the thread, Mom. Pull it hard. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Linda's designer handbag and remembered that anonymous threat. But I also remembered Emma's broken voice asking if she really dressed inappropriately. By morning, I'd made my decision. Harold wasn't the only one who could keep records. It was time to start documenting everything. I met Harold at a small diner 20 minutes outside town, both of us instinctively understanding that this conversation needed to happen away from Cornerstone Baptist's reach. He arrived carrying a manila folder thick with documents, his expression more troubled than I'd ever seen it. Sarah, before I show you this, I need you to understand something, he said quietly, sliding into the booth across from me. I've been documenting irregularities for 3 years, but I've never had the courage to act on what I found. I kept telling myself there had to be reasonable explanations. He opened the folder, revealing bank statements, receipts, and handwritten notes in his careful accountant script. It started when my wife needed surgery and we were struggling with medical bills. I went to Jim privately, asking if the church's emergency assistance fund could help. He told me the fund was depleted. Harold pulled out a bank statement from that same month. But look at this, there was over $8,000 in that account. I only know because I'd set up the funds banking myself years earlier and still received duplicate statements. My stomach dropped as I scanned the numbers. Where did the money go? That's what I started tracking. He spread out more documents. Regular transfers to personal accounts. Cash withdrawals that don't match any authorized church expenses. And then there are these. He showed me a stack of receipts he'd somehow obtained, high-end clothing stores, expensive restaurants, a jewelry purchase for over $2,000. All dated within days of major church fundraisers. Harold, how did you get these? My nephew works at the bank. He's not supposed to share information, but when I explained that I was on the finance committee and had concerns about church funds being misused, he shook his head. Sarah, this isn't just skimming a few $100s here and there. We're talking about tens of thousands over the past 3 years alone. I stared at the evidence spread across our table, feeling sick. Why didn't you report this sooner? Because I'm a coward, he said bluntly. Jim Morrison has destroyed people who've crossed him before. Remember the Hendersons? They raised questions about the building fund 5 years ago, and suddenly there were rumors about Bill's drinking problem and Karen having an affair. True or not, their reputation was ruined, and they left town. That explained the anonymous threat I'd received. Harold, if we report this to the congregation. We need more than bank records and receipts, he interrupted. We need something undeniable. Something that can't be explained away or turned back on us. I thought about Linda's wardrobe, about Madison's boasts of expensive gifts, about that $500 designer dress Linda had worn while shaming my daughter for a Target sundress. What if we could catch them in the act? What do you mean? There's a big fundraiser coming up in 2 weeks for the new sanctuary renovation. What if we documented exactly how much comes in, and then tracked where it actually goes? Harold's eyes lit up with possibility, then darkened with worry. Sarah, that's dangerous territory. If they suspect we're watching, then we better be very careful. I started gathering the documents. Can you make copies of all this? Already done. But Sarah, there's something else you should know. He hesitated. Your name came up at last week's board meeting. Jim suggested that your recent behavior might indicate you're not emotionally stable enough for church leadership positions. He's laying groundwork to discredit you. The coffee in my stomach turned to acid. They were already moving to destroy my reputation, just like they had with anyone else who dared to ask questions. Let them try, I said, surprised by the steel in my own voice. I've got nothing left to lose, and I'm not backing down. But as I drove home, Harold's warning echoed in my mind. The Morrisons had perfected the art of character assassination over 15 years of unchallenged power. I just hoped I could expose them before they destroyed me first. That evening, I was organizing Harold's copied documents at my kitchen table when Emma burst through the front door, tears streaming down her face. Mom, they kicked me out of the church youth choir, she sobbed, dropping her backpack and collapsing into the chair across from me. Mrs. Patterson said my attitude wasn't suitable for leading worship anymore. I looked up from the bank statements, my blood immediately boiling. What attitude? You've never caused trouble a day in your life. She said I was being rebellious and disrespectful to church leadership and that other parents had complained about my influence on their kids. Emma wiped her nose with her sleeve. Mom, I hadn't done anything. I barely even talked to anyone since last week. I gathered the financial documents quickly, my hands shaking with rage. Mrs. Patterson was Linda Morrison's best friend and had been choir director for 8 years. This wasn't coincidence, this was retaliation. Did she say which parents complained? The Washingtons and the Parkers. But Mom, their daughters are Madison's friends. I know they didn't come up with this on their own. I pulled Emma into a hug, feeling her shake against me. The choir had been her sanctuary after her father's death, the one place where she felt confident and valued. They were systematically destroying every connection my daughter had to the church community. My phone buzzed with a text from Janet. Sarah, you need to see the church Facebook page. Now. I opened the app with dread, and what I found made my vision blur with fury. Linda Morrison had posted a lengthy message about protecting our church family from divisive influences and praying for families struggling with pride and rebellion. She hadn't mentioned us by name, but the timing and wording made it obvious. The comments were worse. Dozens of congregation members expressing concern about certain individuals trying to cause drama and undermine pastoral authority. Several people I'd considered friends had liked the post. They're turning everyone against us, Emma whispered, reading over my shoulder. I was about to respond when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Pastor Morrison. Sarah, I think we need to have a conversation. His voice was cold, professional. Could you come to my office tomorrow morning? Say, 10 o'clock? Of course, Pastor. May I ask what this is about? I think you know. There have been some concerns raised about your recent behavior and its impact on church unity. I'd prefer to handle this privately before it becomes a bigger issue. The threat was barely veiled. He was giving me one chance to back down before they escalated their campaign against us. I'll be there, I said evenly. After hanging up, I looked at Emma's tear-streaked face and made a decision that terrified and exhilarated me in equal measure. Pack a bag for the weekend. You're going to stay with Aunt Kelly. Mom, what are you planning? I thought about Harold's evidence, about the fundraiser next week, about that $500 dress Linda had worn while humiliating my daughter. I'm planning to give Pastor Morrison exactly what he's asking for, a bigger issue. What if they destroy your reputation like Dad always said could happen to people who fight powerful institutions? I looked at my broken daughter, at the financial evidence scattered across our table, at the Facebook post designed to isolate us from our community. Sweetheart, sometimes the only way to stop a bully is to hit them so hard they can't get back up. The next 12 hours were going to determine whether I could expose the Morrisons before they buried us completely. Either way, I was done playing defense. I walked into Pastor Morrison's office the next morning dressed in my most conservative outfit yet, a navy blue dress that reached my ankles, long sleeves, hair pulled back so severely it gave me a headache. If I was going down making a point about their ridiculous standards. Pastor Morrison sat behind his mahogany desk, fingers steepled, wearing an expression I'd never seen before, cold calculation mixed with barely contained irritation. Linda stood beside him like a perfectly dressed sentinel, her arms crossed over what I now recognized as a designer blouse that probably cost more than most people's monthly grocery budget. Sarah, please sit, he said without preamble. We need to discuss your recent behavior and its impact on our church family. I remained standing. Which behavior specifically, Pastor? Following the dress code guidelines? Volunteering for the finance committee? Or asking questions about financial transparency? Linda's perfectly glossed lips tightened. Don't play innocent with us, Sarah. You've been deliberately causing division and undermining church authority. The Facebook posts, the dramatic outfits, interrogating Harold about church finances. I haven't posted anything on Facebook, I interrupted. And Harold came to me with concerns, not the other way around. Pastor Morrison leaned forward. Sarah, I'm going to be direct. Your behavior since last week has been erratic and concerning. Several congregation members have expressed worry about your emotional stability following your disagreement with Linda about appropriate youth attire. There it was, the setup Harold had warned me about. They were going to paint me as an unstable widow having a breakdown. Emotional stability, I repeated slowly. Is that what we're calling it when someone asks where donation money actually goes? That's enough, Linda snapped. You have no right to question how this church operates. We've been faithful servants here for 15 years while you've been. While I've been what, Linda? Tithing 10% of my widow's pension? Volunteering for every committee and event? Bringing casseroles to every potluck? My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. Or do you mean while I've been too grief-stricken and trusting to notice that your wardrobe costs more than most people's cars? The silence that followed was electric. Pastor Morrison's face had gone pale, but Linda's eyes flashed with something dangerous. How dare you, she hissed. How dare you imply? I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. That handbag you carried last week? $400. The shoes you're wearing right now? Jimmy Choo's, at least $600. And that's just what I can see. Pastor Morrison stood abruptly. Sarah, I think this meeting is over. You're clearly not in a state of mind to have a rational conversation. Actually, I think this meeting is just getting started. I pulled out my phone and opened the voice recording app I'd started when I sat down. Because I'd love to hear how you explain living like millionaires on a $50,000 salary. Linda's face went white. You're recording this? That's illegal. Actually, it's not. This is a one-party consent state, and I'm party to this conversation. I smiled sweetly. But I'm curious why that would concern you if you have nothing to hide. Pastor Morrison's jaw worked silently for several seconds before he found his voice. Sarah, you're making a serious mistake. This church family has supported you through your darkest time, and this is how you repay that kindness? With paranoid accusations and secret recordings? This church family supported me, I agreed. Which is exactly why they deserve to know if their donations are being stolen. Get out. Linda's voice was shaking with rage. Get out of this office, get out of our church, and don't come back. Actually, that decision isn't yours to make unilaterally, I said, consulting the church handbook on my phone. According to our bylaws, removal of a member requires a formal congregational vote after due process. But I'm sure someone with your deep commitment to following rules would know that. Pastor Morrison moved around his desk, and for a moment I wondered if he was going to try to physically remove me. Sarah, you're playing with forces beyond your understanding. This community means everything to your daughter. Do you really want to destroy that for her? The threat to Emma crystallized my resolve. My daughter's been kicked out of choir, publicly humiliated, and subjected to character assassination on social media. Her relationship with this community was destroyed the moment you decided to make her a target. I headed for the door, then turned back. Oh, and Pastor? The fundraiser for the sanctuary renovation is next Sunday. I plan to be very interested in tracking exactly where those donations end up. As I walked out, I heard Linda's voice, high and panicked. James, we have to do something. She knows too much. I kept walking, my heart hammering against my ribs. I'd just declared war on the most powerful family in our church, and they'd essentially admitted I was right to do so. Now I just had to survive long enough to prove it. The aftermath of my confrontation with the Morrisons hit like a hurricane within hours. By Friday afternoon, my phone was buzzing constantly with calls I didn't recognize and text messages that ranged from supportive to downright threatening. Sarah, this is Beth Williams. I heard about what happened at the church, and I wanted you to know that Tom and I support you completely. We've had our own concerns about the finances for years. That was encouraging, at least until the next message. You're going to regret going after Pastor Morrison. Some things are bigger than your petty grievances. But the real blow came when I got a call from my boss at the medical billing company where I worked part-time. Sarah, I'm sorry to have to do this, but we're going to have to let you go. Mr. Peterson's voice was strained, uncomfortable. We've received some concerning information about your recent behavior, and several of our clients attend Cornerstone Baptist. We can't afford to have our company associated with controversy. My stomach dropped. Mr. Peterson, what exactly were you told? That you've been making wild accusations against church leadership, recording private conversations, and displaying erratic behavior. Look, I don't want to believe it, but we're a small company and we can't risk our reputation. After hanging up, I sat in my car outside Emma's school, hands shaking. They'd managed to cost me my job in less than 24 hours. Without that income, our already tight budget would become impossible. Emma climbed into the passenger seat, took one look at my face, and immediately knew something was wrong. What happened now? I lost my job, I said quietly. The Morrisons made sure word got out to my boss that I was unstable and controversial. Emma's face went through a series of emotions, shock, anger, and then something that looked disturbingly like guilt. Mom, this is my fault. If I'd just worn something different that night. Stop right there, I said firmly. This is not about a dress, Em. This is about corruption and abuse of power. They would have found another excuse eventually. My phone buzzed with a text from Harold, emergency. Can you meet me tonight? They know I've been talking to you. I think they're going to try to remove me from the finance committee before Sunday. I showed Emma the message. Mom, what if they can silence everyone who supports you before you can expose them? That's when it hit me, I'd been thinking too small. The finance committee meeting, the fundraiser tracking, even Harold's evidence might not be enough if they could systematically remove anyone who threatened them. I needed something bigger, something they couldn't cover up or explain away. Does Madison still post constantly on Instagram? Every day. Why? Because teenagers love to brag about expensive things, especially when they think they're untouchable. I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through Madison's social media profiles. If the Morrisons are living off stolen church funds, Madison's the kind of kid who would document every expensive purchase without thinking about the implications. What I found in the next 10 minutes was better than anything Harold had uncovered. Photos of Madison with designer shopping bags, timestamps that corresponded exactly with major church fundraising events. A post from 3 months ago showing off a new iPhone with the caption, Daddy's ministry is so blessed, dated 2 days after the mission trip collection. But the jackpot was a video from last week, Madison giving a room tour of her newly redecorated bedroom, casually mentioning that her parents had finally invested in some quality pieces for the house. The furniture visible in the background was clearly expensive, and she posted it just days after our church's quarterly building fund donations were collected. Mom, this is actually evidence, Emma said, watching over my shoulder. She's literally documenting how they spend stolen money. I was screenshotting everything when my phone rang. Janet's name appeared on the screen. Sarah, where are you? There are people at your house. It looks like they're trying to break in. My blood ran cold. What kind of people? I can see them from my kitchen window. 2 men in dark clothes, checking your windows and doors. I called the police, but they haven't arrived yet. I started the car immediately, mind racing. The Morrisons weren't just trying to discredit me anymore, they were escalating to intimidation tactics that crossed into criminal territory. Em, call your Aunt Kelly right now. You're staying there until this is over. Mom, I'm not leaving you alone to deal with this. Yes, you are. Because if they're willing to send people to our house, this just became about more than church politics. I had less than 48 hours until the fundraiser, and the Morrisons were clearly desperate enough to try anything to stop me. The question was, could I expose them before they silenced me permanently? The police found evidence that someone had tried to jimmy our backdoor lock, but by the time they arrived, whoever had been at our house was long gone. Officer Martinez took my statement with a kind of professional skepticism that told me he thought this was probably a domestic dispute blown out of proportion. Mrs. Henderson, you mentioned this might be related to a church conflict? That seems like quite an escalation, he said, closing his notepad. Are you sure it wasn't just someone checking if anyone was home before attempting a burglary? I wanted to explain about the embezzlement, the threats, the systematic campaign to destroy my reputation, but I could see in his eyes that it would only reinforce whatever the Morrisons had already told people about my emotional instability. You're probably right, I said instead. I'll make sure to keep my doors locked. After he left, I spent an hour on the phone convincing Emma to stay at her aunt's house despite her protests. The break-in attempt had shaken me more than I wanted to admit, and I needed to know she was safe while I figured out my next move. Janet came over with a bottle of wine and a casserole, settling into my kitchen like she was preparing for a siege. Sarah, what aren't you telling me? This is bigger than just questioning church finances, isn't it? I showed her everything, Harold's documents, Madison's Instagram posts, the timeline that connected expensive purchases to major donations. Her expression grew darker with each piece of evidence. Jesus, Sarah. They're not just skimming a few $100s. This is organized theft on a massive scale. She scrolled through Madison's social media posts, shaking her head. That girl has documented thousands of dollars in purchases just in the past 6 months. The question is, how do I present this to the congregation without them dismissing it as a vindictive attack from an unstable widow? I said. The Morrisons have spent the past week poisoning the well against me. Janet was quiet for a moment, then pulled out her own phone. What if you didn't have to present it yourself? What do you mean? I mean, what if someone with an unimpeachable reputation in the church community discovered this evidence independently? She showed me her phone screen, she was typing an email. My brother-in-law David is the district supervisor for our denominational headquarters. He's required to investigate financial irregularities when they're reported through proper channels. Hope fluttered in my chest. Would he actually investigate, or would he just defer to the Morrisons' explanations? David takes this stuff seriously. He's shut down 2 other churches for financial misconduct in the past 5 years. Janet continued typing. But Sarah, once I send this email, there's no going back. If the denomination launches an official investigation, the Morrisons will know exactly who triggered it. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Drop this now, or your daughter won't be safe at her aunt's house either. We know where she is. The wine glass in my hand shattered against the kitchen floor. They were threatening Emma directly now, even though I'd moved her to safety. The message felt like ice water in my veins. Janet, send the email. Now. She looked at the broken glass, then at my face, and hit send without another word. How long before your brother-in-law responds? Usually within 24 hours for something this serious. But Sarah, what was in that text that made you look like you'd seen a ghost? I showed her the message, and watched her face go pale. They threatened Emma directly. At Kelly's house. Janet stood up immediately. That's it. We're calling the police again, and this time you're showing them everything. This isn't about church politics anymore, they're making criminal threats against a minor. But even as she reached for her phone, I knew that involving the police might be exactly what the Morrisons wanted. Another sign of my instability, more evidence that I was blowing things out of proportion. The fundraiser was in less than 36 hours, and I was running out of time to expose them before they found a way to silence me permanently. The next morning brought news that made my blood run cold. Harold called at 6 a.m., his voice shaky and defeated. Sarah, they got me. The finance committee voted me out last night in an emergency session I wasn't invited to. Jim told them I'd been sharing confidential church documents with unauthorized individuals. His voice cracked. They're also saying I might have been skimming money myself, that my questions about the budget were just deflection. I gripped the phone tighter. Harold, that's ridiculous. Anyone who knows you. Knows what? That I've been acting suspicious for months, keeping secret records, meeting with you in coffee shops? He laughed bitterly. Sarah, they flipped the whole narrative. Now I look like either a co-conspirator or someone trying to cover his own theft by pointing fingers. After hanging up, I sat in my empty kitchen feeling the walls close in. They'd eliminated Harold, discredited me, cost me my job, and threatened my daughter. Worse, Janet's brother-in-law hadn't responded to the email yet, and the fundraiser was tomorrow. I was making coffee when I heard a car door slam outside. Through my front window, I saw Linda Morrison marching up my walkway, her face set in grim determination. She wasn't alone, 2 women from the church board flanked her, their expressions equally stern. I opened the door before they could knock. Ladies. What can I do for you? We're here to give you one final opportunity to do the right thing, Linda said without preamble. The church board has called an emergency meeting for tonight to address your recent behavior. You can either attend and publicly apologize for the disruption you've caused, or we'll proceed with formal disciplinary action. One of the other women, Mrs. Patterson from the choir, stepped forward. Sarah, we've all been praying for you. We understand you're struggling with grief and financial pressure, and we want to help. But these wild accusations have to stop. What accusations specifically? I asked calmly. Linda's composure cracked slightly. Don't play games. You've been telling people that church funds are being misused, recording private conversations, and spreading malicious gossip on social media. I haven't posted anything on social media, I said for what felt like the 100th time. Instagram stories disappear after 24 hours, the third woman, Mrs. Collins, said coldly. Just because we can't screenshot them now doesn't mean people didn't see your rants about Pastor Morrison's family. My stomach dropped. They were claiming I'd posted Instagram stories that I'd never made, probably counting on the fact that most older congregation members wouldn't understand how Instagram worked well enough to question their claims. You're lying, I said flatly. See? Linda turned to the other women triumphantly. This is exactly the kind of paranoid, aggressive behavior we've been dealing with. She can't even admit what she's done. Mrs. Patterson's expression softened with what looked like genuine pity. Sarah, honey, we know you've been under tremendous stress. Raising Emma alone, financial difficulties, and now losing your job, it's understandable that you might lash out at people you perceive as having more than you do. The condescension in her tone made my hands clench into fists. They'd crafted the perfect narrative, the unstable widow driven to delusion by grief and jealousy. Tonight, 7 p.m., Linda said. Church conference room. This is your chance to make this right before we have no choice but to pursue more serious consequences. After they left, I called Janet immediately. They're moving faster than we expected. Emergency board meeting tonight, and they're claiming I posted things on Instagram that I never posted. Sarah, David emailed back an hour ago. The denominational investigation starts Monday morning. Can you hold them off until then? I looked at my reflection in the hallway mirror, hair disheveled, dark circles under my eyes, wearing yesterday's clothes. I looked exactly like the unstable widow they were painting me as. I don't know if I have a choice. That afternoon, I made a decision that would either vindicate me completely or destroy what little credibility I had left. Instead of waiting for tonight's kangaroo court, I was going to the source, and I was going to get the evidence I needed on camera. Madison Morrison got out of school at 3:15 p.m. I knew this because Emma had mentioned it dozens of times over the years when coordinating youth group activities. What I was counting on was Madison's complete inability to keep her mouth shut when she thought she had power over someone. I parked across from Cornerstone Baptist's youth building at 3:45 p.m., knowing Madison always stopped by after school to use the church's Wi-Fi for homework since her parents monitored her internet usage at home. Through the windows, I could see her alone in the youth room, sprawled across the couch with her phone and laptop. I walked in like I belonged there, my phone already recording video in my jacket pocket. Oh. My. God. Madison looked up from her screen with undisguised glee. Sarah Henderson. Mom told me you finally lost it completely. Are you here to, vandalize something? Because I should probably call the police. Actually, I wanted to apologize, I said, keeping my voice humble and defeated. Your mother was right about Emma's dress, and I overreacted. I've been under a lot of stress since losing my job. Madison's eyes lit up with malicious satisfaction. Yeah, I heard about that. Dad has a lot of influence in this town. Cross our family, and things just happen. She leaned back smugly. Maybe you should have thought about that before trying to cause drama. Your father got me fired? I asked, injecting just enough shock into my voice. Duh. One phone call to the right people, and suddenly you're unemployable. Madison was practically glowing with pride. That's what happens when you mess with people who actually matter in this community. I moved closer, making sure my phone would pick up every word clearly. Madison, I know your family has been very blessed financially. Your parents must work really hard to afford all the nice things you have. She snorted. Work hard? Please. Dad figured out years ago that churches are basically free money. All these idiots throwing cash at God's work while we get to live like we deserve. Madison gestured around the youth room. You think this dump pays for my lifestyle? Mom's designer clothes? Our new BMW? My heart hammered against my ribs. She was confessing everything, and she was too arrogant to realize it. The church donations must be really generous, I prompted carefully. The building fund alone brought in $30,000 last quarter, and maybe $5,000 actually went to building improvements. Madison made air quotes, laughing. The rest went to much better use, if you ask me. Mom's been wanting to redo the master bathroom for years. What about the mission trip fund? Oh, that's my favorite. All these families scraping together money to send kids to serve the poor, and Dad just takes 70% off the top. The trips still happen, they're just way cheaper than what people think they cost. Madison's grin was absolutely vicious. Plus, I get spending money for cultural experiences. I couldn't believe how freely she was talking. Doesn't anyone notice the money discrepancies? Dad's been doing this for 15 years. He knows exactly how much he can skim without people getting suspicious. And if they do? She shrugged. Well, look what happened to you. And that pathetic Harold guy. Dad ruins people who ask too many questions. My phone felt like it was burning a hole in my pocket. This recording was everything I needed, a full confession from the pastor's own daughter, admitting to systematic embezzlement and criminal intimidation. Madison, what if someone recorded this conversation? I asked, testing her confidence. She laughed so hard she nearly fell off the couch. Who's going to believe anything you say now? You're the crazy widow who lost her job for harassing church leadership. I could confess to murder, and people would think you made it up. That's when I pulled out my phone and showed her the recording app that had been running for the past 10 minutes. The color drained from Madison's face as she realized what she'd just done. You can't, that's illegal. Actually, it's not. And Madison? I smiled for the first time in weeks. You just destroyed your parents' entire operation. The blood drained from Madison's face as the reality of what she'd just confessed on camera hit her. For a moment, she looked exactly like what she was, a spoiled 17-year-old who'd just realized she wasn't untouchable after all. Delete that, she whispered, then her voice rose to a shriek. Delete that right now. She lunged for my phone, but I was already backing toward the door. I don't think so, Madison. You don't understand. My parents will kill me if they find out I told you. She stopped mid-sentence, her face going even paler as she realized she'd just admitted her parents had something to hide. Maybe you should have thought about that before confessing to felony embezzlement, I said, clutching my phone like a lifeline. Madison's shock lasted exactly 30 seconds before transforming into the same vicious calculation I'd seen in her mother's eyes. She pulled out her own phone with shaking hands. Mom? It's me. Sarah Henderson was just here, and she tricked me into saying things. Her voice took on the whiny, victim tone she'd probably perfected over years of manipulating her parents. She recorded me without permission and she's threatening to post it online unless we give her money. My stomach dropped. She was setting me up for extortion charges. I never mentioned money, I said loudly enough for Linda to hear through the phone. Madison covered the speaker and smiled at me with pure malice. Your word against mine. And whose reputation is already destroyed? Through the phone, I could hear Linda's voice rising in pitch, though I couldn't make out the words. Madison nodded along, throwing in strategic sobs. She said she was going to ruin our family unless we paid her to keep quiet about lies she made me say, Madison continued. Mom, I'm scared. She's acting really crazy. I realized I needed to get out of there immediately. Whatever Madison was telling her mother, it was about to make my situation infinitely worse. But as I headed for the door, Madison's next words stopped me cold. Don't worry, Mom. I didn't tell her about the offshore account or the real estate purchases. She only knows about the small stuff. Offshore account. Real estate purchases. The scale of the Morrisons' theft was apparently much larger than anything Harold or I had discovered. Madison realized her mistake immediately, her eyes widening in horror as she looked at my phone, still recording. I have to go, she said quickly into her phone. Just fix this, Mom. Please. After hanging up, she stared at me with a mixture of fear and hatred. You have no idea what you've just done. My family doesn't just ruin people's reputations. Sometimes people who threaten us have accidents. Move away suddenly. Disappear. Is that a threat, Madison? It's a promise. Delete that recording, or you'll regret it for the rest of your very short life. My hands were shaking as I backed out of the youth building, Madison's words echoing in my head. But worse than her threats was the realization that I'd stumbled onto something much bigger than local church corruption. Offshore accounts suggested money laundering. Multiple real estate purchases meant they'd been stealing for years, possibly decades. I was halfway to my car when I saw Pastor Morrison's black sedan pulling into the church parking lot, driving far faster than anyone should in a church zone. Through the windshield, I could see his face, and Linda's beside him. Both looked absolutely murderous. My phone buzzed with a text from Janet. Sarah, where are you? 2 men in a black truck have been circling your house for the past hour. I called the police again, but they said they need more evidence of actual criminal activity. Another text came in immediately after, from a number I didn't recognize. You have 1 hour to bring us that phone and any copies you've made. If you involve the police or anyone else, your daughter will pay the price. We know exactly where Kelly lives. I looked up to see Pastor Morrison and Linda getting out of their car, both walking toward me with purpose. Behind them, Madison was running across the parking lot, probably to tell them exactly what I'd recorded. I had less than 60 seconds before they reached me, a recording that could destroy them in my pocket, and nowhere safe to run. The emergency board meeting tonight was starting to look like the least of my problems. I made it to my car just as Pastor Morrison reached the parking lot pavement, his face darker than I'd ever seen it. My hands shook as I fumbled with the keys, but the engine turned over on the first try, a small miracle considering how my luck had been running lately. Through my rearview mirror, I watched Linda grab Madison by the shoulders, clearly demanding to know exactly what had been said. Madison's animated gestures and Linda's increasingly horrified expression told me everything I needed to know about how that conversation was going. My phone rang as I pulled out of the parking lot. Pastor Morrison's name flashed on the screen. Sarah, I think there's been a misunderstanding. His voice was carefully controlled, but I could hear the barely contained panic underneath. Madison is young and sometimes says things she doesn't mean. I'm sure whatever she told you was just teenage exaggeration. Teenage exaggeration about offshore accounts? I asked, turning onto the main road while constantly checking my mirrors. The silence that followed lasted long enough for me to wonder if the call had dropped. Then, Sarah, you need to understand something. You're playing with forces much bigger than a small-town church. There are people involved in our financial arrangements who don't appreciate interference. My blood ran cold. What kind of people, Pastor? The kind who make problems disappear permanently. Bring me that recording, and we can work something out. Keep it, and I can't guarantee your safety. Or Emma's. The line went dead. I immediately called Janet, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. Janet, I need you to do something for me right now, and I can't explain why over the phone. Sarah, you sound terrified. Where are you? Listen carefully. I'm about to send you a video file. The second you receive it, I need you to forward it to your brother-in-law, the local FBI field office, and at least 3 people who don't attend our church. Can you do that? The FBI? Sarah, what did you find? Evidence that this is much bigger than church embezzlement. Madison Morrison just confessed to everything on camera, including offshore accounts and real estate fraud. I was driving aimlessly through residential neighborhoods, trying to figure out where I could safely go. Janet, they're threatening Emma directly now. They said they know where Kelly lives. Oh my God. Sarah, you need to call the police right now. And tell them what? That the respected pastor of a 15-year-old church is running some kind of criminal enterprise based on a teenager's recorded confession? My voice cracked with frustration. They already think I'm an unstable widow making false accusations. I pulled into a McDonald's parking lot and quickly uploaded Madison's confession to my cloud storage, then sent copies to Janet, Emma's phone, and my sister Kelly. If something happened to my phone, or to me, the evidence would still exist. Another call came in from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Mrs. Henderson, my name is Agent David Chen with the FBI Financial Crimes Division. I believe you sent some information to my colleague about suspected embezzlement? Relief flooded through me so quickly I almost started crying. Agent Chen, yes, but it's much bigger than I originally thought. I just recorded a confession that mentions offshore accounts and... Ma'am, I need you to stop talking and listen carefully. Based on what we've reviewed in the past hour, you may be in immediate physical danger. Pastor Morrison has connections to a money laundering operation that's been on our radar for 2 years. My hands went numb. Money laundering? Churches are perfect fronts for cleaning illegal money, cash donations, minimal oversight, religious protection from scrutiny. We believe your church has been processing funds for a regional drug distribution network. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The expensive lifestyle, the threats, Madison's casual mention of people who make problems disappear. This wasn't just about stealing from parishioners. Agent Chen, they've threatened my daughter. She's at my sister's house, but they said they know where she is. We're already dispatching protection for both locations. But Mrs. Henderson, I need you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in an FBI field office 30 miles from town, watching Agent Chen review Madison's recorded confession with a kind of grim satisfaction that told me I'd stumbled onto something they'd been building a case around for months. Mrs. Henderson, your daughter's dress code incident may have just helped us crack a 2-year investigation, Agent Chen said, pausing the recording at the point where Madison mentioned the offshore accounts. We've been tracking suspicious financial activity through several churches in this region, but we needed inside evidence to prove the connection. My phone buzzed with a text from Kelly. Emma is safe. FBI agents are here and explained everything. She's proud of you, Sarah. Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by exhaustion. The weight of the past 2 weeks, the humiliation, the threats, the systematic destruction of my reputation, suddenly felt crushing. What happens now? I asked. Now we execute search warrants that have been ready for 6 months, Agent Chen smiled. Your recording gave us probable cause we couldn't establish before. We'll have Pastor Morrison, his wife, and their associates in custody within the hour. As if summoned by his words, Agent Chen's phone rang. He answered, listened for a moment, then looked at me with something approaching amazement. Mrs. Henderson, when we served the warrant at the church, Pastor Morrison immediately asked for a lawyer and refused to talk. But his wife, Linda, talked? She couldn't stop talking. Apparently, she thought if she cooperated fully and blamed everything on her husband, she might avoid prison time. He shook his head. She's been giving us details for the past hour about money laundering, tax evasion, fraud, the works. Over the next 3 hours, I learned the full scope of what had been happening at Cornerstone Baptist. The Morrisons had been skimming from church donations for over a decade, but 3 years ago they'd been approached by a criminal organization looking for ways to legitimize illegal funds. The church became a washing machine for drug money, with fake donations and inflated expenses hiding hundreds of thousands of dollars. The bitter irony wasn't lost on me. If Linda had just let Emma wear her Target sundress to youth group, none of this would have come to light. 6 months later, I stood in the same courthouse where Pastor Morrison was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison, Linda to 8 years, and Madison was given 3 years of probation as a juvenile who'd been manipulated by her parents. The money laundering network that had been using churches across 3 states was dismantled completely. The congregation at Cornerstone Baptist initially struggled with the revelations. Several families left, unable to process how completely they'd been deceived. But under new leadership, the church not only survived but grew stronger. They now publish detailed monthly financial reports and have implemented oversight procedures that have become a model for other congregations. Emma and I stayed. It wasn't easy at first. Some people struggled to separate me from the chaos that had engulfed their church, even though I'd been the one to expose it. But gradually, attitudes shifted. The other parents whose children had been unfairly dress-coded over the years spoke up. The families who'd been denied assistance from funds that were supposedly depleted shared their stories. Harold Jennings was reinstated to the Finance Committee with an official apology and now chairs the new Oversight Board. Janet's brother-in-law, the denominational supervisor, used our situation as a case study for implementing financial accountability measures across the entire district. As for Emma, she rejoined the choir and eventually became youth group leader. Her favorite activity is organizing fundraisers. She takes particular joy in being able to tell donors exactly where every dollar goes. The FBI kept Madison's recorded confession as evidence, but I still have my own copy. Sometimes, when I'm having a difficult day, I listen to the part where she says, "Who's going to believe anything you say?" Turns out, when you're telling the truth, people believe you more than you think. Even when you're just a widow in a Target dress asking uncomfortable questions.